Now, the moment that I've waited for now is what I was created for now. I'm gonna let you know what I'm feeling now. I must be quite emphatical. I'm feeling plain ecstatical. Wow. I might just float right up to the ceiling. The joy inside me, the smile you see, it's for one reason alone. The time and place where I want to be is holy hot damn, right where I am now. The past is too historical now. The future needs an oracle now. Is when you feel euphorical. Trust me, your crowning achievement, your greatest prize will come on the day that you realize the moment you're living for. Wow, is now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Britt Elders. I'm sitting in for Shirley, who is still filming. She sends her best and hopes to be back at the helm soon. We have a wonderful guest tonight that has written a book that everyone out there can take something from to improve their life. Dr. Kavitha Chinnaiyan is an MD who blends her expertise in cardiology with her knowledge of Ayurveda, yoga, Vedanta, tantra, and the direct path in a program that helps her patients discover bliss amid chronic illness. She is an award-winning integrative cardiologist at Beaumont Health System and an associate professor of medicine at Oakland University, William Beaumont School of Medicine in Rochester. Dr. Kavitha, thank you. Welcome to Independent Expression Radio. I am so pleased that you're with us tonight.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here.
Absolutely. Okay, where to begin? This is quite an incredible book. What brought you to write?
Well, such a great question. It was more of an overflow of creative energy rather than really anything else. There was so much coming up in my own explorations, and there are artists, I'm sure you know, of people who paint or sculpt or do different things, and it's just something they can't help. It just flows out of them. And writing for me is like that. It's a flow of creative energy.
Oh, that's fabulous, because you don't think of a cardiologist actually writing and writing in terms that people can understand and grasp. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
The concept behind the Heart of Wellness is really a new paradigm in integrative health, is it not?
It is. It is. And I think I want to clarify a little bit about this book because there are lots and lots of books out there which talk about a holistic approach to health, which includes the mind and body and so on.
Right.
And what I'm trying to present in this book is actually a paradigm shift, and which is a shift in the very way we look at things. Because even in a holistic model, which I'm very familiar with, the premise is that we are this mind and body that needs to be improved, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm all for that.
Right.
And that we need to do all these things in order to improve ourselves and in order to improve our minds and bodies and so on, and that we are really aiming for some kind of an end goal. And what I'm presenting here in this book is a paradigm shift that who we are, it's, that the very foundation of who we think we are is different. And
Right.
we are not limited to this body and mind. And who we are is really eternal bliss consciousness. And how to recognize that. And what happens if we recognize that to this whole idea of the body mind? What happens if we are able to integrate all of ourselves into understanding that, we are not really limited to this. Disease doesn't limit us. Lack
Right.
of wellness doesn't limit us. So how do we recognize that? So that is, the paradigm shift I'm presenting in this book.
It's masterful. And you begin the book by addressing bliss, which
Yeah.
I've got to say, I think many of us out there want to know what bliss is and how do we find it in this crazy world we live in.
Yeah, and that's such a great question, and it's a very fundamental question because that word bliss, I think, is overused in our culture right now,
Yes.
and it's somewhat of a cliche. And it was, if you remember Joseph Campbell's famous statement of "find your bliss,"
Mm-hmm.
and that has been really misinterpreted, since he has said it, and he has actually regretted saying that
Oh,
because what
so we
because
misinterpreted it. Yes.
yeah, because somehow we think that bliss means doing whatever we like and then
Uh-huh.
avoiding what we don't like. But that's not really what bliss is. Bliss is really who we are. I mean, think about that. That's so hard to wrap our minds around. What do you mean bliss is who I am? I don't
Right.
feel blissful all the time. And so, this issue of what is bliss is another word for that is everlasting contentment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when you're contented, it's not like you're slap happy all the time, which is what
Right.
that word bliss sometimes gets
Yes.
translated into. But it's not that. It's not like being ecstatic and happy all the time. It's always being grounded in fulfillment and contentment. And why does that happen? Because as long as we are identified as this limited body mind, we're always going to have a sense of lack,
Mm-hmm.
that discontentment and being incomplete, because that is the very essence of becoming identified as this person, as the one with the story, the one with this history, and the one with these aspirations. When we get very tightly bound to that, that thing is always going to be incomplete because that is its very nature, because there's always be more to know, more to gain, more to acquire, and so on and so on and so
Right.
on.
But it's the knowledge in some ways that prevents us from finding that bliss because we
Exactly.
limit it to the body and the mind and we go no further.
Yes. Exactly. And even if we do, we are always trying to find that contentment. We are always trying to say, we're always trying to find that one thing that will stop us from wanting anything else.
Right.
That one relationship, that one job, that one thing, the next thing. If I only have that, then my life will be complete. This is like this universal thing, isn't it? If I
Mm-hmm.
have that, then I'm going to be fulfilled. I'm going to be
How did we
happy.
get there?
That is the very nature of this identification, with this mind and body. And that's its very nature. And how does that happen? There are so many different ways of looking at it. The one thing that I love, the one perspective that I love is that, who we are is really divine consciousness. And
Right.
the divine consciousness clothes itself um, as this limited body mind just to have fun. It's
Mhm.
like
Okay.
so it's like the actor taking on a role and forgetting that he's not the role. He or she is not the role and
Mm-hmm.
forgetting their very identity. So that's really what happens to us. And that keeps us on this path of continuous seeking and these ups and downs of sometimes I'm happy, sometimes I'm not, sometimes I'm fulfilled, sometimes I'm not. So the bliss, that word bliss is the one that transcends all of these things into this sweet, contentment.
The
Um,
contentment, I love that word because that's just something that I strive for. I mean, even when faced with adversity, I
yeah,
think you have to look at the adversity as to what it brings to you in a lesson rather than avoid it,
yeah,
address it, but address
yes,
it from the heart, from the spirit, not from, oh my gosh, I stubbed my toe, it hurts, I'm going to deal with it that way. Um, does your ego begin and identity begin to fit into the equation because we've created these personas of ourselves?
yeah.
How do we remove that so we can open to all of this?
Yeah, so that is the very essence of that book. How do we go about doing that? So that's what I really get into with a lot of different practices and techniques and lifestyle things that will
Mm-hmm.
help us, realize who we really are. And then our whole perspective about health and disease changes, because we are no longer identified as this, limited body mind. And so we don't, the disease doesn't stops uh, defining our identity. and
Right.
and so you bring up this word ego, and that's a very, very important thing. So this whole thing we've been talking about so far, this limited identification with the body mind, that is the ego.
Mm-hmm.
That identification with this limited self is the ego. It's not necessarily, sometimes we use the word ego as meaning, um, somebody with a hyperinflated sense of self.
Right.
Um, and that's not necessary. That may be the case in colloquial language, but in this language that I use, in the book, the ego is this identification which is universal.
Yeah. God, there's a lot of things out there universal that we aren't recognizing now.
Yes.
Let me ask you a question because I found this really fascinating. Are disease and suffering interchangeable?
Hmm. Yes. So, and this is what what we learn in medical school, that once you alleviate the disease, the suffering goes away. And
Right.
what I can tell you from my own clinical practice is that is not so.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like, for instance, I grew up in India, and I trained in India, and suffering in a developing country means a very different thing than suffering here,
Right.
um, because there, for instance, disease can take the form of communicable diseases,
Right.
infectious disease like malaria or typhoid or uh, tuberculosis or something like that. And so you can see how, having that disease acutely can lead to a lot of distress and suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And so but we treat it, and this is so easy to see, but we because there are antibiotics and wonderful drugs to treat these kinds of things, and so we treat it, the disease goes away. But do we actually alleviate suffering? I mean, does the person
Right.
is the person contented after that? Is Have they found everlasting contentment because the disease has gone away? Not really, because then something else becomes their identity, right? And
Right.
so it is here in this very affluent country. Um, a lot of people that come to me don't really have any disease, nothing that we can actually find, with our testing and with all of that. But they're not contented. So the suffering is there, whether you have disease or not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then there are those rare people that have disease but don't suffer because they have transcended suffering.
Right.
And the disease is there, but doesn't really affect them. They're contented all the time. So, a huge, a huge thing for us to contemplate on whether our body state determines our suffering in that 1-to-1 ratio.
How do we get past that? How do we not equate one with the other? Because there's so many, and I'm just going to throw this out there. There are a lot of angry people out there
Yeah,
now, especially in this country.
yeah.
And in that, I find that they bring about their own suffering and their own disease.
Oh,
Have
yes,
you found that to be true?
very much so. And actually, anger and hostility are known risk factors for many different chronic illnesses, such as heart disease. And we know that. And, there's a lot of that described in my book as well, how the mind really affects the body,
Right.
and how that actually percolates into cellular pathways in the body, how we think and how we feel and how we respond to the world. So that is definitely the case, that bringing on our own suffering, um, which is true for a lot of different things.
And I have to go to something else. Is it part of the concept primarily in Western medicine that you have to place blame at the foot of something else, some exterior something, when you are ill or when you are suffering, instead of moving inward to find out what created that within you and why possibly you even need it so that you can begin to address these things?
Yeah, and you brought up like the very crux of the issue. How do we stop blaming things? For instance, in my book, I talk about um, this issue of determinism. In
Hmm.
heart disease, people will come to me and say, well, my parents had heart disease, my siblings have heart disease, I'm really worried and I must have it. I must have it as a
Yeah.
result. So but that doesn't work like that. You know why? Because we don't really only inherit our parents' genes.
Right.
This whole issue of epigenetics is showing us that our genes are influenced by our behavior.
Hmm.
And it's not just one way where the genes influence what happens to us, but what happens to us also influences our genes. So in this instance, we don't inherit only our parents' genes, right? We also inherit the way they eat, the way they think, the way they behave, the way they respond to the world, the way they get anxious and stressed out about things. We kind of imbibe that.
Right.
And so when we take complete responsibility for our own lives, which is what which is my mantra, which is take complete responsibility. And what that means is not blaming yourself, but saying, I have the power to be different. I have the power in me to change all these things that are not serving my wellness and my
Right.
life, and so we can actually influence our genes. It's not that just because we inherit a gene that's going to be expressed. That doesn't
Hmm.
happen in every case. So we have the ability to actually take complete responsibility and change our lives, change the way our health and our wellness is going to play out for us.
That's so interesting because we don't want to look at what we can do to make ourselves whole, to live in the true concept of holistic health. We look for the excuse that can mean a fast fix, but that fast fix, whether it's surgery or medication or whatever, isn't always, and I would say 99% of the time, is not the answer to what the problem is. And the wholeness of everything, what I got out of your book, and I thought was so beautiful, the wholeness of everything is we're all part of creation, of everything out there.
Yes.
And we need to learn from that. How do we get to that where we can learn from all aspects of life?
And so that takes a fundamental shift in our paradigm, right? It takes
Hmm.
that is the shift I'm talking about, which is how do we go from continuously turned externally, where everything, my happiness depends on everything that's going on in the world, politically, culturally, socially, in my family, and
Right.
with my health and my disease and so on. How do we go from there to saying, oh my gosh, everything is breathtakingly beautiful, if and how do I change my vision? That's really what this is.
That's
How do
it.
I
Yeah.
Yeah, how do I change the way I look at things? And that's what that's what I go a lot into in the book, which is how do we go about doing that?
And you definitely recommend yoga.
Yes.
Ayurveda, Tantra, and I have an email from a member that would like to hear your definition of Tantra because so many people out there attach one label or another to it. How does it fit into your regime?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, Tantra actually is made up of two words. And, it's the first word is tanoti, and tra is trayoti. And together, these words mean actually liberation through expansion.
Mm-hmm.
And so what tantra really is ultimately, in my definition, it is absolute intimacy with experience. And
Mm-hmm.
and so what that means is recognizing, and not this is not just an intellectual knowing, but actually experientially recognizing that I'm not separate from everything around me, from everyone, from this whole creation. I'm not separate. I am creation. I am the fundamental thing um, that is you. I am the stable. I am the air. I am the sun. And understanding that experientially, knowing that, that is really tantra.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Because that shifts so much just in that basic understanding. The American Indians have a term, we are all related. But this expands it even more. And I've spent a lot of time in South America and Central America, and the indigenous people down there believe a rock has a purpose, is a living thing,
Yeah.
and needs to be incorporated into your life. And this sort of expands that even more.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And so it is. It is. It's a very logical and a very systematic process in tantra. There is no such thing as a belief in tantra. It's always asking, you know, s- look at your direct experience, look and
Mhm.
see. And so when we say look at your direct experience, if we are completely identified in our story, in our, in the quagmire of our existence, it's really impossible to stand back and see. you know it's
True.
not possible to do that if we have no background. I mean, we can have these, each of us, all, billions of us that inhabit the earth has these routine experiences. It's just
Hmm.
that we don't recognize it. When you see something beautiful, when you experience something beautiful like a sunset or the water, or your beloved's face or your child's face, or everything, every one of us has these experiences routinely. It's
Right.
just that before we even recognize it, it's gone, and we are back into our story. It's not that these are extraordinary experiences, because all of us are capable of this. It's
Yes.
just that we are so involved in our story, in this constant commentary that goes on in our minds about this and that, and all these self-referential thoughts that make up our whole waking hours, they take over.
That's
And
really sad.
well, that's the work we need to do, is how do we go from there to there, where these experiences are not kind of random, but we start seeing them, in our daily lives. And so that's
Absolutely.
really what happens when this paradigm shift occurs.
Well, we started something, my husband and I, years ago, that sunset. That's that is quiet time.
Yeah.
We sit, we watch the sunset. We don't think about the day, what's happened, anything else. We let the sunset literally wash us
Oh, yeah.
from all of the stress that we've drugged with us throughout the day. So
Yeah.
it's a quiet time that for us works. Other people have other things. I meditate regularly. My husband does too, which I've got to get to this because interestingly, you say people should meditate twice daily,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be an hour long meditation. 20 minutes is ample.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And Not at all. In fact, I don't even recommend an hour-long thing. It's really not for everyone, the
Uh-huh.
hour-long meditations, and they can cause problems. And we are simply not capable of meditating that long,
Right.
most of us. So an hour-long thing is not at all necessary. 20 minutes twice a day is all we need, for that rewiring of our paradigm to occur over time.
Right.
And then the most important thing that happens with meditation, as I'm sure you can speak to, is after a while, when you have established enough inner silence in your own system, you're able to stand apart from your experience even as it's happening.
Right.
And right, it's
Yes.
that witnessing ability, and that's where, only when that happens, true transformation can occur, because now there is a space between what is going on very intimately in our experience and how we interpret that, how we make a choice based on that. Everything, it happens in that gap between the experience and where we stand.
Mm-hmm.
It's really one of the greatest gifts of meditation.
Immediately following meditation is where, when I'm in that still, quiet space of being with all,
Yeah.
I find that's where answers to questions come.
Yes.
And it just makes things so much more understandable because, as you say, you are looking at what's happening. Your vision has shifted. You can see the big picture rather than the immediate stress and fractured thoughts and all of that that goes along with it.
Yeah.
Do most people find that?
Yes, most people will find that. It does take, a committed practice. It does
Hmm.
take, and it's very individual. For some people, it happens immediately after you take up meditation. For some, over weeks, months, years. It's hard to predict when that might happen, but it will happen. It will happen. So,
Right.
and it's just a matter of committing to the practice and say, well, whatever happens, I'm going to do this.
Yeah. Let's talk about the default and the bliss models.
Hmm.
What's the difference between the two? I know
Um,
we've covered a little of it already, but
yeah. The default model is that it takes who we are to be this limited body mind.
right.
And the bliss model says we are unlimited, eternal bliss consciousness. So
Hmm.
that is the difference between the models. So everything that we do, whether it's in modern medicine or holistic medicine or alternative medicine, complementary medicine, it comes from the default model. Unless, we are really striving to understand or to shift that paradigm, which does happen actually in Ayurveda and other, um, systems. They start with that, but sometimes that we start with that, but then we kind of get caught up in, what is my body type, what kind of things do I need to do to feel better, and so on and so on. And
Right.
those are all very good things as long as they're still leading to that understanding that who I'm is not this.
Hmm. How important is one's dosha to your program?
It's not at all important in the way we think. I think it doesn't really matter what kind of dosha we have. I work through, in this book, I really talk more about the digestive fire, or Agni, and really strengthening that Agnis. And Agni is, when we talk about the digestive fire, we tend to think of digestion in the stomach and intestines. That's only part of it.
Right.
This digestive power is the ability to process information, our sensory perceptions, our past memories, our past issues. And that constant processing requires a very stable, balanced Agni, or the digestive fire. And so the prescription I have in the book is actually to balance that, so that our recognition of our true nature becomes more facilitated.
you also have a gut quiz on your
Yes.
website.
Yes.
That yeah, that's a good starting place, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's very useful for people who are trying to figure out, what is really my gut situation right now? How do I work with it? And it gives you a personalized program based on the particular imbalances.
Right. And you've got a wonderful chapter in here too. I've got so many questions. I'm sort of jumping all over the place. And it talks about how we can get off of the superhighway and can we do it? You want to explore that a little bit here?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so the superhighway that I'm talking about, these uh, the neurohormonal pathways. So when I say neurohormonal, it goes into what we were talking about earlier, a little bit of the tantric concepts that everything we do is triggered by, like, our whole nervous and hormonal system.
Mm-hmm.
So there is this autonomic nervous system, there is a central nervous system, and then there is a whole hormonal pathway. Everything, from moment to moment, our stimulus results in immediate recognition and the firing of certain neurons,
Right.
and the a lot of it is unconscious and automatic because it takes place through the autonomic nervous system. From moment to moment, there's a change in our blood pressure, in our heart rate, in our respiration, based on how that stimulus is perceived,
Mm-hmm.
and that is transmitted to the master gland, to the pituitary and the hypothalamus and so on. And there are there is a release of hormones, specific kinds of chemicals that are carried through the blood into every cell. And, there is a um, cascade of cellular reactions thereafter. So you
Mm-hmm.
can see how everything we do is constantly monitored by this neurohormonal pathway. And when it so happens that when we condition ourselves to respond in the same way to the same kind of stimulus, it becomes a superhighway because now the nerves, the neurons and the whole pathway adapts itself to fire exactly like that every single
Right.
time. So if I look at somebody and I have this repulsion, the next time I might have to remember that. But after a few times, I just look at that person and the repulsion arises, you know,
Right.
or
Right.
the aversion arises. You don't even have to think about it because now it's become a superhighway, right?
Mm-hmm.
You eat chocolate one, two, three times, and then it's become a superhighway. You start drinking coffee. Very shortly, it's become a superhighway where you don't really have to think about it. It's become your way. It's become your habit.
Right.
And so how do we go about getting off that highway, the super highway, as I call it? And that is retraining those neurohormonal pathways by standing very still and observing what is going on within ourselves. And that takes a very balanced agni, takes all these practices, meditation, breath, and so on, where we can get off that highway and form new neural pathways that are more beneficial for us.
If we get to the point that we can do that, what changes in our life can we expect to see?
Um, Incredible number of changes. One, and at the outset, I'd like to say that a lot of these changes are subjective.
Right.
And people think, well, is my blood pressure going to go down? Maybe. Is your cholesterol going to go down? Maybe.
You
Is my
relate it right to the body reaction. Yes.
Yes, immediately, right? And is my cancer going to go away? Maybe that can happen. It happens to a lot of people. Is my
Mm-hmm.
heart disease going to go away? Maybe. Is my valve going to somehow heal itself? Maybe not. You may still require surgery, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But the intangible effects are the ones that allow us to live in absolute harmony with creation. You know,
Uh-huh.
it's it's this it's this understanding deeply of things like gratitude and compassion and sweetness and living in non-resistance to life. living in alignment with what is.
Right.
And that cannot be explained in words. You have to live that.
Well, let me ask you, does that mean surrender? Does that mean acceptance of all that is?
Yes, that's exactly
Hmm.
what it means.
How do we get there?
Well, that's the program in the book.
Because today everything is so fast and so really insane,
Yeah.
and extreme,
Yes.
that and the program in the book is fabulous. And on your website you have a program to learn meditation if you can't. And there are many people out there that just say, I can't meditate. They're just caught up in your superhighway and they can't get off. Um, but it, it's something that is difficult, being bombarded from every direction, to
Yeah.
really try to even take the time to achieve this bliss model, which is important to, in my opinion, survival.
Yes. Yes. And, that's the thing. We are especially, I can't even say that this is in the West, but because, the playing ground is leveling across the world where this westernization is going on everywhere.
Right.
But somehow we are so caught up in this model of instant gratification.
Right.
It's like I'm going to start meditating, and tomorrow I want to see the results. Uh,
Exactly. Yeah, instead of looking at the cause of why you're ill, you run to the doctor to get something to make it go away right away. Yes.
Exactly, and even so with with these kinds of practices, of working with your diet, working with meditation, working with the different practices outlined in the book, it takes time. Imagine how much time it has taken us for 20, 30, 40 years to become really set in our ways,
Right.
for these super highways to have formed. And they're not one or two or three, right? We have opinions about everything,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how do you expect those things to change overnight? It doesn't happen like that. You at least need to give it the same amount of time as it took to form them. And there is absolutely no quick fix. That I can guarantee. There isn't one. If somebody
That's
is telling
important to
you,
understand.
yes, and if somebody is telling you, come to me and I will show you how you can overcome all of your conditioning in one day, I can tell you that that's a hoax. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
work like that. It
Mm-hmm.
absolutely doesn't work. I wish it did. And trust me, I have looked. it, it simply doesn't work like that. It takes work. It takes commitment. It takes a reprioritizing, more than anything,
Right.
because we have to be able to reprioritize. And for me and for so many others that I have worked with, the real change started happening when their priorities shifted. Instead of saying, I want this, and
Mm-hmm.
I also want peace. You see how the priorities are numbered?
Yeah, kind of skewed.
It's cute, right? But once that priority shifts, and you say, I want peace at all costs. I want contentment first and everything else later. That's why it said, seek first the kingdom of heaven, and all
Uh-huh.
else will be added to you, right? All else will be
Right.
given to you, because we have to seek that first. And only when our priorities shift like that, that's when the magic begins to happen.
I've got to ask you because, I mean, just from your background, you were an overachiever.
Yes,
Um,
to say the least.
yeah, I know the feeling. How, what brought you to a space of understanding that the achievements, the accolades, the recognition, the outside view of yourself was not as important as the inside view?
Yeah, it took a lot because um, I, as you said, an overachiever, and something that a lot of your listeners can relate to is I couldn't stop. It's like going, one thing after another. Okay, now I'm done with this. And for me, my particular conditioning happens to be in academics, but it can be anything else.
Mm-hmm.
You can replace that with a need for approval, need for recognition, need for relationships to work. You can replace any of that. It doesn't matter. But
Right.
we're all overachievers like that because we always are looking for the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And for me, I just went from one thing to another. It was like doing well in school, then doing well in college, doing well in medical school, then this, then this, then this. And
Right.
finally, and then of course, I need to get married and then I need to have a child. You see how much pressure we put on ourselves. and um, and then
And
I
we
came,
forget the wholeness of it all.
oh
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And so I came to a complete standstill after the birth of my second child. It was like, why am I not content?
Uh-huh.
I have all this, everything that I always wanted, I have it now. And yet there is this energy of wanting more. And
Right.
and so it so happens that our whole society is built like that, where we start thinking that's normal. you know
Mm-hmm.
so when I look at my colleagues, when I look at everybody around me, everybody's like that. So it's natural to think, yeah, this is normal, right?
And it's
And
what society dictates.
it's what society dictates, exactly. So, and then learning that, and then I had this very huge epiphany that I'm never going to be satisfied, no matter what I achieve. I'm never going to feel contentment. It just came to occur to me that I was looking in the wrong place.
Uh-huh.
And so that really changed, where I was looking. So this whole inward journey began, and changes my own perspective really started changing my clinical practice, where I felt like I couldn't go into work, talk to patients, prescribe medicines and procedures and so on, and not talk to them about this fundamental thing. So
It
yeah,
is
that's how it
so
all began.
fundamental. It is,
Yeah.
it should be the core of everything. And it
Yes.
doesn't mean just stopping life. This is where, again, to me, the extremes come in. People think, okay, to find contentment, you have to stop everything around you. You have to move away from any clutter. You've got to stare at a flower for 14 hours a day, whatever that takes. It doesn't work that way. You still have to live. We chose to be here in this third dimensional experience. It brings about wonderful lessons if we allow it. But somehow, in the last few years, especially, I think we have been there's some that are trying to educate that if you avoid those lessons, that's how you find contentment.
Oh yeah.
And what you were saying with the view of inside out and outside in makes such a difference.
Yeah. And this is where there, especially for your or listeners who are interested in tantra, it's the paradigm I'm presenting is one that works with your daily life. You don't have to give up your life. I mean, look at
Right.
me, right? I am probably one of the busiest people I know. And between my work and my family and my children and my writing work and all these different courses I do and so on, it's really hectic. And I can't prescribe to this go away to some mountaintop and then find peace there. And
Right.
okay, if unless you plan to live there forever, because you'll have
Hmm.
to come back anyway. And what are you going to do then?
Right. Yeah, exactly. That is very true. Now, we have to reverse our views. It's,
Yes.
uh, and it is a matter of training, and it's a matter of recognizing, I think, the understanding that we are so much more than what we limit ourselves to. But you've got to, at towards the end of the book, a great thing on finding bliss in the body
Yeah.
and cultivating the skill of noticing, of understanding what your body's trying to tell you is so important. And you go through that so beautifully.
Yeah, it's one of those, absolutely magnificent lessons, of finding bliss in the body. But you can't get there unless you have some amount of inner silence that is created through the other kinds of work, of working on
Right.
the digestive fire and the meditation and so on. But once you are able to find that, I can tell you with my own experience, your whole life changes. Your whole that you can actually feel the rewiring of your body.
Mhm. And you also seem to really lean towards the thought creates the reality,
Hmm. It
and
does.
which we, the left brainers out there go, okay, well, quantum physics is beginning to really open to this.
Yes.
But if we understood that our thought of anger,
Yeah.
distress, stress on any level,
Yeah.
manifest that in our life, we could really move forward, couldn't we? As a culture,
Absolutely.
as a society, a global society.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And we don't really have to believe anything. I mean, think about it.
Right.
It so happened that, I was working with I just had this conversation with my 13-year-old, and we were just driving from somewhere, and this is where our most profound conversations occur. And
Thank goodness for cars.
oh, thank goodness for cars. So she asked me, Mom, how do I stop worrying about what people think about me?
Oh,
And
great question.
isn't it? And I said, well, here's the thing. Think about where, just focus and just remember and just see if you can bring awareness to this. What do you think about all the time? Who
Mm,
are your thoughts centered around? And she's a very astute little girl. And she said, myself, everything relates to me, right?
mm-hmm.
I said, for instance, look at a group picture. Where are your eyes drawn to first? Yourself,
Right.
right? And so all of our thoughts, our day, our waking thoughts revolve around ourselves. Even when we are thinking about somebody, it's in relation to us. And
Mm-hmm.
so when that is going on, I asked her, I said, so really think about it logically. How much time do people actually have to think about you when all they can think about is themselves, right? I mean, all of us. It's not a personality flaw. It's just, one of those things that happens with this identification with the body mind. It's just it's just the nature of things. So how much
Brilliant.
time does anybody have? And she said, that's true. I said, let's try this experiment. What happens to you now? Just pay attention to your breath and to your, how you feel inside, your mood and your heartbeat and your physiology. Just pay attention to your physiology and now think that somebody's thinking badly about you.
Right.
And she thought about it and she said, I feel terrible. I said, okay, now let's switch around. For a moment, think that the world is beautiful and everybody has really no time to think about you. Everything is beautiful as it is, and it's actually a benevolent world and it's a kind world out there. What happens to your actual experience? And she sat with it for a while and she said, wow, this is incredible. There is an absolute change in how I feel. I said, see, this is it. How you think shapes your reality, right?
Wow.
And so it isn't, you don't really have to believe anything. You think
Mm,
about it right now. And that is the beauty of this paradigm that I'm presenting is don't worry about any beliefs. There is no religious belief attached to it at all.
mm-hmm.
Just open to your experience right now and see how your physiology works.
Mm-hmm. Well, the self-doubt and the self-pity aspect are profound, and especially in today's culture where we feel we have to label everything
Oh yeah.
and make it fit in a box. Um,
Yes.
there is no box.
There isn't a box. and
No,
and yeah, and it's so important for us. And most of us who are parents, um, we can't teach our children this kind of a thing unless it has become our own reality and
that's
we've worked
true.
with it. you know. And this is one thing that is very urgent for me too, because I have two children, and you know, I can't teach them what I don't know. So it has to become my reality, and
Hmm.
it has to become my way of life. And so I'm constantly working on myself so that, you know, that can be imparted to them in whatever way that is meant to be.
Right. Right. I think this is such a marvelous way of really opening yourself, number one, but number two, retraining through simple steps the
Yeah.
way to present yourself with a whole new perception of reality.
Yes.
It's quite, it's really profound to read this book and go, oh, okay, I get that. Boy, did I screw that up. All right, let's change it and move forward with it. It's, I've got to ask you how important regime is in your program. Specific sleep habits, meditation, all of that. Um, Diet,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
a really good focus in here too. How important is having a daily regime?
Extremely important. And why it's important is it's very logical. The reason that it's important is when our neurohormonal firing is erratic, it's impossible to really stand back and look at our own process.
Hmm.
When it's erotic and chaotic, your body doesn't really know when to secrete which hormone, when to fire that neuron, when to do something, because we're eating at a different time every day, we're going to bed at a different time, and then someday we meditate, someday we don't, someday I
Right.
drink alcohol, someday I don't. It really doesn't know what to do, right? So we want to train our bodies, those pathways, by first setting up a regime, and that is the fundamental, teaching in Ayurveda, is this issue of timings, following the timings. And the nice thing about it is, these Ayurvedic texts have been saying this for about 5,000 years. And
Right.
last year, the two Americans that got the Nobel Prize for physiology was for their work in the circadian rhythms, and they're finding all of this to be exactly true.
Hmm.
And and so modern science is now supporting this, and so sticking to that is extremely important.
It's not that difficult if you just begin with sleep
Yeah.
on changing. I mean, I was always a night person, and then I thought, oh, this is not functional for the things I was doing at the time. And I started awaking. It took like 5 days, 6 days max to get my system where sun up, I was awake. By 10 o'clock at night, I was ready for sleep. It
Yeah.
was quite a change, but it happened so quickly.
Yeah.
And then I found the same with diet and even meditation. I mean, it's really imperative to me that I get that space in for me. But it's not just for me. And I think this is something that if people will kind of look at it, the space is not just about you. It's about
Yes.
all that is.
Yeah.
And
Eh,
that is
yeah.
such a massive importance to understand. It's not just going, I, it's all.
Yes. How beautiful. How beautiful. Such a lovely insight over there. It's
Well, we spend
gorgeous.
most of the day figuring out I problems. So, so take the meditation time and become the all.
Yes, exactly. I love that. I love how you say that. It's so beautiful.
Well, thank you. But this is truly an amazing book. And the regime aspect of it is easier to change sometimes than people want to recognize.
Yeah.
And we can all get to a space where we can literally, no matter what you're faced with, remove the stress if we want to.
Yes. It's possible.
It's and it's not that difficult. It takes time. I love that you said that because most people are are looking for, and so many teachers out there today are presenting, oh, this will be a quick fix. You do this, you do this, you do this, and it'll all be gone.
Yeah.
Took a long
Yeah,
time
it's
to get there.
yeah, I really don't, subscribe to this 21-day program and 28-day program or 7-day program and
Right,
things like that, because that's really, I just have found out in my very long search that there isn't a magic bullet.
right.
There just
How
isn't.
how has this affected your cardiology practice?
Um, it really has, because, I spend a lot more time with my patients talking about their specific issues and their lifestyle, and then I do lifestyle prescriptions and educate people, especially those who are open to it.
Hmm.
And it I can see those effects, I can see those results, because I'm not always prescribing medicines. I do prescribe medicines whenever it's needed. I do send people to the cath lab or to procedures when they need it. That's
Right,
it's not like a substitute, but really working with the fundamental thing that we are all seeking for, but very few of us even talk about, which is bliss, or that contentment.
right. Wow, it's profound, and um, it's not that difficult. It doesn't take that much to begin the journey,
Yes.
and your book is just so full of things that can propel you in the direction of reaching contentment, which means then that you don't have to experience the suffering, even with disease. So that brings me to the concept of how you have bliss even with illness. That's
Yes.
amazing.
Yes, and ultimately, a lot of the diseases that we work with, heart disease and cancer, particularly in the industrialized nations, are incurable.
Right,
They are chronic illnesses. So does that mean we are doomed to suffer? I think
right,
not. I don't think so. And it's possible to find sweetness regardless of the state of our bodies, and how do we go about doing that, and that's really what I wanted to address.
Well, you do, and you address the fact that everyone is an individual and different things will happen at different times.
Yeah.
And not to, I love that whole concept of not sticking a time on it. It's
Yeah.
so important. Wow. This has been invaluable. Thank you so much, Dr. Kavitha. This is just eye opening, and I really recommend this book to everyone. The Heart of Wellness. It's a beautiful blend of Eastern thought, Western medicine, but it can set you in a path so you can find that inner contentment. And it'll take some work. That's okay. Um, maybe that should be one of the biggest goals of the planet, you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I mentioned that in the book, that it's really not hard. It's easy, but I mean it's not hard as in it's not difficult to understand. It's very simple, but simple
Yes,
doesn't mean easy, because it's going to take a lot of commitment, a lot from us in wanting to change. And and that's something that can't be forced, it just has to happen.
right. Amazing. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. This is great.
Thank you so much for having me. I had so much fun talking with you.
Oh, good. Well, hopefully we can do it again. Let's stay in touch so we can catch up with all the different things that you're working on, because I think this is probably going to be just, you've got 2 books out now, but I expect many more in the future.
Oh, thank you so much.
You write beautifully. It's wonderful to see a cardiologist that expresses herself so fabulously.
Oh, thank you. That means so much.
Oh, well, enjoy and keep informing us. We
Uh,
can all learn more and more every day.
Sure thing. Thank you.
Okay, good night.
Good night. Bye.
Everyone, tonight in that health and wellness session, try taking the day's events, the world's events, and putting them at the back of the list for solving. Try finding your commitment at the top of the list and see what happens. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful week. Good night.